She simply called a young plumber to fix the tap, but when he was about to leave, she whispered, "Please, don't go." That's how it all started. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The late afternoon sun filtered through the half-drawn curtains of Lena's small but tidy home, casting warm golden patterns on the wooden floor. A faint ticking of the wall clock was the only sound accompanying the chaos that reigned in the kitchen. Water had pooled beneath the sink again, soaking through the old rug and creating a musty smell that clung to the air. Lena stood barefoot, her dark blonde hair pulled into a loose bun, sleeves of her worn sweatshirt rolled to the elbows as she tried, and failed, to tighten a leaking pipe with an old wrench she barely knew how to hold. A drop of water landed squarely on her forehead. She sighed, loudly. "Great," she muttered, tossing the wrench aside and leaning against the counter with closed eyes. Behind her, the muffled voices of her children echoed from the living room. Lucas, 7, was attempting to build a spaceship out of cereal boxes. Mila, 4, was busy decorating the living room floor with stickers from an old book she had found. Parenting alone was like juggling knives and torches while running a marathon. Lena had long since accepted that perfection was not in her cards. Survival was enough. After mopping up the mess as best she could, she picked up her phone and dialed the number from a flyer she had pinned on the fridge weeks ago. K&M Plumbing, fast, fair, and friendly. She wasn't in the mood for friendliness, but she was definitely desperate for fast. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, promising a visit within the hour. Lena thanked the dispatcher and hung up. With 30 minutes to spare, she scrambled to tidy the kitchen and change into something marginally more presentable. She didn't expect to impress a plumber, but she didn't want to look like she'd just survived a hurricane either. She chose a soft cotton robe, the only clean thing within reach, and tied it loosely around her waist before checking on the kids. By the time the doorbell rang, Lena had managed to light a candle to mask the damp smell and herd the kids into the den with snacks and cartoons. She opened the door with a forced but polite smile, expecting someone middle-aged with an oil-stained shirt and heavy boots. Instead, a tall man stood before her, wearing a clean navy blue work shirt with his name stitched on the pocket. Marcus. His skin was smooth, rich, and deep in tone, his eyes dark and intelligent beneath a pair of neatly arched brows. His frame was strong, confident, but not imposing. A utility belt with tools hung from his waist and a red toolbox rested in one hand. "Hi, I'm Marcus from K&M, he said, his voice calm and smooth, like warm coffee on a cold morning. "Here for the kitchen leak." "Yes, come in," Lena said quickly, suddenly aware of the robe she wore and how her bare legs peeked from beneath it. She pulled it tighter. "The leak's under the sink. It's bad." Marcus stepped inside, his movements quiet, respectful. He didn't gawk or make her feel small like some repairman had in the past. Instead, he nodded toward the kitchen and got straight to work, setting down his toolbox and kneeling with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times. Lena hovered nearby, arms crossed more for modesty than out of judgment. She watched him unscrew the cabinet doors and assess the pipes with methodical precision. Something about the way he moved, focused, deliberate, caught her attention. It wasn't just confidence. It was care. "You've got a loose compression fitting," he said, leaning back to look up at her. "Probably been dripping for weeks, and that trap's almost rusted through. Did you smell something musty?" Lena nodded, a little embarrassed. "I thought it was just the kids' shoes or something." He smiled slightly, not mocking her. "I'll fix it. Might take a couple visits to do it right, though. There's corrosion back here. Shouldn't be too expensive, but it'll need parts." "Okay," she said, trying not to wince at the idea of more costs. "Just let me know what you need. I appreciate you coming so quickly." "No problem," Marcus said, and turned back to the pipes. She stepped aside and leaned against the fridge, watching as he worked. Her mind wandered. There was something oddly grounding about him. Maybe the steadiness in his voice, or the way he seemed more interested in solving the problem than impressing anyone. He worked in silence except for the occasional question about her water pressure or when the last repair had been done. Lucas tiptoed into the kitchen, wide-eyed and curious. "Whoa, are those real tools?" he asked, pointing at the belt around Marcus's waist. Marcus turned, gave the boy a smile. "Yep. You like tools?" Lucas nodded enthusiastically. "I want to be an inventor. I'm building a spaceship." "You'll need a good wrench for that," Marcus replied, pulling a small tool from his belt and handing it to him for a moment. "But don't forget goggles. Real inventors need to stay safe." Lena watched as her son grinned from ear to ear. It was rare to see him open up to strangers, especially men. Something about Marcus broke through his usual shyness. Mila soon followed, shyly peeking from behind her mother's leg. Marcus waved. She didn't respond, but she didn't run either. Small victories. After nearly an hour, Marcus sat back on his heels and wiped his hands on a rag. "I've patched the worst of it for now," he said, "but I'll need to come back tomorrow to finish the replacement. Is morning okay?" "Yes, that's fine," Lena said. "Thank you." Their eyes met for a second longer than necessary. He nodded and stood, gathering his tools. As he lifted the red box, Lena instinctively reached to open the door for him, her hand brushing his arm. She felt it, the quiet warmth of skin beneath fabric. Just a second. But it caught her breath. Marcus seemed to feel it too. His movement paused just a moment before he stepped outside and gave a parting nod. "See you tomorrow." Lena stood at the door long after it closed, her fingers still tingling. She wasn't sure what just happened. It had been such a small gesture, barely a touch, but it lit something in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. The kids had gone back to their cartoons. The leak was temporarily fixed, and silence returned to the kitchen. But the air felt different now, like something had shifted. Lena sat at the table, cradling a lukewarm mug of tea, staring at the red smear of sunset through the window. She had called a plumber, that was all. Just another item on the endless to-do list of her overburdened life. But she couldn't stop thinking about the way Marcus had looked at her, not with flirtation, not with pity, just genuinely, as though he saw her. Not a tired single mom in an old robe, but a woman, a person. And the way Lucas had smiled at him, that smile hadn't happened in months. She wrapped the robe tighter around herself and shook her head, trying to dismiss the thoughts, but deep down she knew. This wasn't just a repair call. It was the beginning of something she didn't yet have the words for. And tomorrow, he was coming back. Morning came quickly. Lena woke to the sound of birds outside the window and the soft thuds of Lucas jumping from his bunk bed, his feet hitting the carpet as he shuffled down the hallway. The light in her bedroom had already changed from soft gray to gentle gold. She lay still for a few moments, the memory of the previous afternoon washing over her like warm water. Her hand moved almost unconsciously to her arm, where she had touched Marcus's sleeve. It was foolish, she knew. It was a moment, a second at most, but it had stayed with her through the evening like an echo that refused to fade. The children were already stirring in the kitchen when she finally pulled herself from bed. She wrapped herself in a cardigan, tied her hair into a low knot, and joined them. The kitchen looked a little better, a little calmer. The leak was gone for now. The silence of dripping water had been replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the clinking of cereal bowls. There was something comforting in the return to normal sounds. She poured herself a cup of coffee, staring briefly at the clock. Marcus had said morning. She wasn't sure what time exactly that meant, but part of her was already too aware of the time. She glanced down at her robe, then at the mirror on the hallway wall, grimacing at the thought of being caught in the same outfit again. Today, she would be dressed. Casual, yes, but decent. Not for him, of course, just for the sake of being put together. By 9:30, she was in a pair of jeans and a soft gray t-shirt, her face lightly washed and hair tied back more neatly. She didn't wear makeup. There didn't seem to be a point, not for someone who hadn't been on a date in over 3 years. But still, she wanted to look awake, capable, alive. When the doorbell rang at 9:45, her heart skipped the briefest beat. She told herself it was just because she hoped he would fix the plumbing completely today. But when she opened the door and saw Marcus standing there, that same calm expression on his face, toolbox in hand, she knew it wasn't just that. "Morning," he said, his voice low and pleasant. "Morning," she replied, stepping aside. He entered with the same respectful quiet, nodding to Lucas, who appeared from behind the couch like a curious squirrel. "Hey, man," Marcus said with a smile. Lucas grinned and waved his wrench. "I still have this." "I see that," Marcus said. "Taking good care of it?" "Yep. I'm building something even cooler now." Mila appeared behind her brother, clutching a stuffed giraffe. She didn't speak, but offered a small wave. Marcus crouched to their level. "Hi, Mila." She blinked at him and pressed her cheek against the giraffe's fuzzy neck, then turned and ran back down the hallway. "She's shy," Lena said, smiling. "I get that," Marcus replied, rising. "So, back to business. I've got the replacement parts. Shouldn't take more than a couple of hours. The corrosion went deeper than I thought, but I'll reinforce the seal this time. It'll last." Lena stepped back, letting him move into the kitchen. He knelt again, retrieving tools and slipping under the sink like a surgeon returned to a patient. She watched him for a moment, then walked to the counter and began making another cup of coffee. After a moment's hesitation, she opened a cabinet and pulled out a second mug. "You want some coffee?" she asked. He leaned out from under the sink, his brow lightly damp from the summer heat. "Sure, that'd be great." She handed him the mug when he emerged again, their fingers brushing briefly. Not an accident. Not this time, but they both pretended it was. He took a sip and nodded approvingly. "You make it strong. That's how it should be." "Kids make you need strong coffee," she said, leaning against the counter, arms crossed lightly over her chest. He chuckled, setting the mug on a clean patch of countertop. "I believe that." A comfortable silence settled over them. He returned to work, but Lena didn't retreat into another room this time. She sat at the table with her laptop open, attempting to catch up on invoices from work. Her attention, however, drifted constantly back to Marcus. It wasn't just his hands, though they were certainly easy to notice. Strong, precise, capable. It was the way he worked, with focus, care, and pride. She hadn't seen a man so immersed in doing something well in years. Between bursts of typing and sips of coffee, she found herself asking him small things. Where he was from, how long he'd been doing this, what he did when he wasn't fixing pipes. "I grew up on the south side," he said, his head still half buried in the cabinet. Mom passed when I was 16. My brother was 9. I started working soon after. Helped pay bills, kept him fed. Lena's fingers froze on the keyboard. You took care of him? He shrugged, emerging briefly. Someone had to. My dad wasn't around. Still isn't. That's a lot, she said softly. You were just a kid yourself. He gave a half smile, more to himself than to her. Yeah, but it taught me responsibility. I don't regret it. There was a pause. Lena looked down at her screen, the numbers blurry. I know a little bit about that. Doing it alone. He glanced up, meeting her eyes. Yeah, I figured. You did? Single moms always have that look, not in a bad way. Just strength. You walk like you're carrying everything. She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever seen her that way, not even her own family. Most people only saw the mess or the exhaustion, never the effort behind it. Thanks, she said finally, her voice quieter than she expected. Marcus nodded and returned to his tools. The moment passed, but something lingered, an unspoken understanding, a thread quietly connecting them. When he finished the repairs a little after noon, the house already felt lighter. No more drip, no more smell, no more rust. Just clean, silent pipes and a new sense of calm. All done, he said, wiping his hands and standing. Lena looked up from her seat and closed her laptop. You're fast. I try. Lucas ran in, waving a new cardboard creation. Can he stay for lunch? Lena laughed, but Marcus raised a brow. I don't want to intrude. You're not, she said, surprising herself with how quickly the words came. I made grilled cheese. It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join us. He hesitated for a beat too long, then nodded. Sure, I'd like that. They ate at the small kitchen table. Lena, Marcus, Lucas, and Mila. It felt oddly natural. The kids asked him questions about tools and monsters and whether he could build a rocket. He answered with gentle humor, and when Mila finally spoke, asking if giraffes could fit in bathtubs, he gave her a perfectly serious response that made her giggle uncontrollably. After lunch, he helped clear the plates and thanked her for the meal. She walked him to the door, where he paused, one hand on the knob, the other still holding his red toolbox. I'll call in the invoice later, he said, but don't worry about it today. I'll pay it, she replied. You deserve it. Not about that. He looked at her, expression unreadable. You needed someone to show up. I did. Something fluttered in her chest. I'm glad you did, she said. Their eyes met again. It was the same electricity, the same quiet pause that had lingered the day before. But this time it was stronger, fuller. He nodded and stepped outside. She watched him go, then closed the door slowly, her fingers resting on the frame. That night, after the kids were asleep, Lena sat on the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea, staring at the empty kitchen. It looked better, cleaner. And not just because the leak was gone, because someone had walked in, seen the mess, and hadn't run. She didn't know where this would go. She didn't even know if it would go anywhere at all. But for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And that was enough. The week passed with the quiet rhythm of a house returning to its ordinary routine, yet nothing felt entirely ordinary anymore. The repaired pipes no longer leaked, the kitchen was dry and functioning, and the damp smell that had haunted the corners of Lena's home had been replaced by something cleaner, lighter. But the silence that usually followed such repairs was filled now with something more elusive, expectation maybe, or uncertainty. Lena tried not to think about Marcus, or rather, she tried not to think too much, but the effort was futile. His presence had lingered like fingerprints on glass, subtle but undeniable. Every time she passed the kitchen, she remembered his hand brushing hers. Every time Lucas spoke about inventors or tools, her mind conjured Marcus's voice, patiently explaining to her son how a valve worked. Even Mila, usually slow to trust, had begun mentioning him in passing, as if he were already a character in their lives. But Marcus hadn't called. Not about the invoice, not about anything. And though Lena told herself it made sense, he was a professional, the job was done, and his silence didn't mean anything, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Or perhaps that something had never started at all. Friday morning came with its usual chaos. Lucas couldn't find his socks. Mila spilled juice on the rug, and Lena's inbox was already overloaded with billing issues from work. She powered through it all with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been alone long enough to know that no one else was going to fix things for her. Still, her heart wasn't entirely in it. That afternoon, as she stood folding laundry, her phone buzzed. For a fleeting second, she hoped, it might be him. But it was just a reminder about an upcoming dentist appointment. She laughed at herself, dry and bitter. She wasn't a teenager waiting for a boy to call. She was a mother of two, a woman who had long since buried the fantasy of someone showing up simply because they wanted to. Still, that night, when the kids were in bed and the house finally stilled, she found herself opening the gallery on her phone, scrolling idly until she reached a photo Lucas had taken by accident when playing with the camera. It was blurry, tilted, but Marcus was in it, standing in the kitchen, leaning over the sink, completely unaware. The look on his face was one of focus and patience. Lena stared at it longer than she should have, then locked her phone and went to bed. Across the city, Marcus sat in a dimly lit room above the auto garage where his cousin worked. He lived in the small apartment upstairs with his younger brother Malik, who was currently out with friends. The space was cramped, functional, filled with hand-me-down furniture and the smell of engine oil. Marcus sat at the table, staring at a bill for brake pads, his mind far from car parts or invoices. He hadn't called Lena, not because he didn't want to, but because he did. The job had been simple enough. A leak, some rust, a few hours' work. But what had started as routine had unraveled something inside him he hadn't expected. Her house hadn't been fancy, but it had warmth. Her kids weren't just polite, they were kind, curious. And Lena herself, she had looked at him not with pity, not with flirtation, but with something quieter. Realness. And it had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Marcus had grown used to walls, building them, reinforcing them, living behind them. He had been the provider, the problem solver, the dependable one. There hadn't been space in his life for softness, for affection that asked nothing but offered everything. But in that kitchen, over grilled cheese sandwiches and a child's question about giraffes in bathtubs, something had shifted. He remembered the look on Lena's face when she invited him to lunch, the cautious hope in her voice. The way she had leaned against the doorframe when he left, her eyes lingering like she wanted to say more, but didn't know how. And it terrified him, because for the first time in a long time, he had wanted to say more too. But what could he offer her? A man barely keeping his own life stitched together, trying to launch a business while raising a brother and digging himself out of years of financial weight. She deserved stability. A partner who could take something off her plate, not add to it. Still, the silence between them felt like a rope pulled too tight. The next morning, Lena stood in the kitchen, her laptop open beside a bowl of cereal no one had touched. She stared at the email she had written the night before, a thank you message she never sent. Just a few lines. I appreciated your help. The repairs have held perfectly. The kids still talk about you. Hope you're well. She hovered over the send button, then closed the laptop instead. Later that day, she took the kids to the park. It was warm and breezy, the playground buzzing with weekend energy. Lucas ran ahead to the monkey bars. Mila clung to Lena's hand until she saw another little girl with chalk and dashed off. Lena sat on a bench, watching them, sipping lukewarm coffee from a travel mug, and then, as if conjured by thought, she saw him. Marcus was standing near a food truck, talking to someone. He hadn't seen her yet. He wore jeans and a black t-shirt, sunglasses perched on his head, his stance relaxed but alert. She recognized the toolbox in the bed of his truck behind him. He hadn't changed, or maybe he had, just not on the outside. Their eyes met seconds later. Recognition. Surprise. And then that familiar pause, a breath between two lives crossing paths again. He walked toward her, slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she echoed, trying not to smile too obviously. "Fancy seeing you here." "I had a service call nearby," he said. "Thought I'd grab a sandwich." "You working weekends now?" He shrugged. "Trying to build something. Gotta take what comes." She nodded, watching Lucas swing himself off the bars with a whoop. "You were good with them. The kids." He followed her gaze. "They're good kids. You've done a good job." The compliment hit her deeper than she expected. "Thanks." A pause. "I didn't call," he said finally, eyes focused on the pavement. "I wanted to. Just didn't know how to show up without a toolbox." Lena looked at him, really looked. The strength, the weariness, the hesitation, and, beneath it all, something vulnerable. "You don't need tools to show up," she said. He sat beside her on the bench, not too close, but not far either. "I'm not great at this," he admitted, "letting people in. I usually just fix things and move on." "You didn't fix everything," she said, her voice softer. "The sink doesn't drip anymore, but I still think about you." Marcus turned his head to look at her. "I think about you, too." Another pause, another rope slowly loosening. They sat in silence as the children played, the sun drifting slowly westward. Nothing was resolved, nothing promised, but the presence of possibility hung between them, delicate and unspoken. And for now, that was enough. The air that evening felt warmer than usual, tinged with the scent of freshly mown grass and distant charcoal grills. It was the kind of evening Lena once longed for during the chaotic, sleepless years when both children were still in diapers and she had barely a moment to breathe. Now, as she stood at the kitchen counter slicing apples for a bedtime snack, there was a curious quiet humming in the back of her mind, an anticipation, quiet but persistent. It clung to her thoughts even as she moved through the well-rehearsed routine of wiping counters, checking backpacks, and convincing Mila to brush her teeth. Marcus had not made a grand promise. No sweeping declarations or dramatic returns, but something had shifted between them at the park. A current of understanding, a cautious alignment of two people whose paths had nearly missed each other. When they sat on that bench, side by side but saying little, Lena hadn't felt the usual tangle of nerves or uncertainty. What she felt instead was presence. Grounded, steady, almost real. And now, for the first time, he was coming back. Not to fix anything. Not as a plumber, just as himself. She checked the clock again, even though it had only been 3 minutes since the last glance. The kids were winding down, Lucas already in his pajamas, Mila drawing quietly at the coffee table. Lena had dressed without overthinking it. Simple black leggings, a fitted navy sweater, hair pulled back into a low ponytail. She didn't wear perfume, but dabbed a hint of lavender oil at her wrists, not to impress, but to feel human. Alive. The doorbell rang just as she returned from the hallway, and she paused, her hand instinctively resting on the edge of the counter. One breath, two, and then she crossed the living room and opened the door. Marcus stood there holding a brown paper bag and 2 bottled teas. His smile was small but warm. "Thought I'd bring dinner," he said. She stepped back, allowing him inside, her lips curving. "Didn't take you for the takeout type." "I'm full of surprises," he said, setting the bag on the kitchen table. They moved together without awkwardness. She got plates, he unpacked containers, stir-fried noodles, grilled chicken, and a small carton of fried plantains. "The place near my shop makes the best food," he explained, "and they always give you more than one person can eat." "Perfect," Lena said, "because Lucas eats like a grown man when he likes something." The kids were already peeking around the corner. Lucas made no attempt to hide his excitement. "Marcus," he said, bounding into the kitchen. "Hey, buddy, still building that spaceship?" "It crashed, but I'm making a robot now." Mila appeared, quieter but clearly pleased. She hovered near her mother, clutching a crayon. "Are you staying for the movie?" she asked. Lena turned, surprised. "What movie?" "I told her we could watch one later," Lucas said with a shrug. "It's Friday." Marcus smiled, eyes glancing toward Lena. "If I'm invited." "You're invited," she said before she could stop herself. Dinner was messy and loud in all the best ways. Lucas talked nonstop. Mila occasionally added commentary, and Marcus listened, asked questions, even offered to help with robot schematics once he had time. Lena watched him interact with her children with growing warmth. He didn't perform. He didn't overcompensate. He simply showed up again. After the plates were cleared and the kids were allowed 1 hour of screen time, the 4 of them settled into the living room. The movie was some animated adventure Lena had seen 3 times already, but tonight it felt new. Lucas sat sprawled on the floor, Mila tucked under a blanket, head on a pillow, and Marcus beside Lena on the couch, close but not touching. Halfway through, Mila's head began to nod. Lena lifted her gently, carried her to bed, then returned to find Marcus helping Lucas find his lost robot sketch. They talked in low voices. The house felt unusually full, not crowded, but lived in, like all the empty corners had found purpose. When Lucas was finally in bed and the house quiet again, Marcus remained on the couch, his hands resting on his knees. Lena joined him slowly, folding her legs beneath her. "I didn't expect tonight to feel like this," she said. He turned to her. "Like what?" "Normal. Safe. Not like something I need to question." Marcus exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's what scared me." She looked at him, confused. "I'm used to things feeling hard, heavy, strained. This, being here with you, with them, it doesn't feel like that. And I think I didn't call because I didn't think I deserved it." She was silent for a moment. Then, with gentle honesty, she said, "You do." He glanced down, as if uncertain how to receive the words. Then he looked at her more openly than ever before. "I think about you, Lena, more than I should. I think about how you carry everything, how you don't complain, how you make grilled cheese like it's a love letter." She laughed, startled. "It kinda was." "I felt it," he said, "and that terrified me." They sat in stillness. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of pipes expanding with the drop in temperature. "I don't know what this is," Lena said finally, "but I know what it isn't. It isn't temporary. It isn't casual. I don't have the luxury of half measures." Marcus nodded slowly. "Neither do I." Their hands touched gently, then held. Not a grab, not a grasp, just contact, real and calm. The moment stretched, deepened. "I've never felt anything like this," he said, his voice a murmur. "Me neither." And then he leaned in, not fast, not demanding, and she met him halfway. The kiss was quiet, soft, not hesitant, but deliberate. It carried no promises, but it wasn't hollow either. It was a question, a beginning. When they pulled apart, Marcus rested his forehead gently against hers. "I want to try," he whispered. "Whatever this is. I want to see where it goes." "So do I," she said. They sat like that until the clock ticked past midnight, and when he left, finally, with a promise to return, not for work, not for repairs, but simply for them, Lena stood at the doorway and felt something inside her unclench. Not everything was solved. Life was still uncertain. But tonight, it had taken a turn, and she had taken it willingly. Sunday morning brought with it the kind of stillness that only came when the world was in no rush. The neighborhood, often alive with lawnmowers and distant barking dogs, felt unusually hushed. Lena stood by the kitchen window, cradling her coffee, watching dew evaporate from the grass. It had been 2 days since that night on the couch. 2 days since she kissed Marcus. 2 days since something inside her cracked open after being shut for years. The kiss had been a shift, not a spark, not something fleeting or thrilling in the moment, only to fade by morning, but rather a shift of weight, like an invisible burden had been redistributed. She felt lighter and heavier all at once. She hadn't told anyone, not her sister, not her closest co-worker, not even her reflection. She had simply let the feeling settle in her, like sediment in still water. It was there now. She could feel it with every heartbeat. Marcus had texted her the next morning, a simple, "Thinking of you, I'll call later." And he had. They had spoken that evening while the kids were getting ready for bed. The conversation had been casual, comfortable, until it ended with a silence neither of them wanted to hang up on. Now it was Sunday. No plans were made, no promises, just a quiet understanding that something between them had begun. Lucas ran into the kitchen, holding a piece of construction paper covered in scribbles that vaguely resembled a blueprint. "Mom, can I build this in the garage?" Lena smiled, taking the paper. "What is it?" "A time machine," he said proudly. "Oh, well, in that case," she said, inspecting the drawing with feigned seriousness, "you're going to need extra duct tape." Lucas grinned and darted away. She followed him with her eyes, her smile slowly fading as her thoughts drifted. As much as she wanted to embrace what was happening with Marcus, doubt had started to creep in like a slow-moving fog. They hadn't talked about logistics, about how this would work, about her children, about his responsibilities. She didn't know how long he would want to be around, or if this was just something he'd gently fade from when reality became too complicated. She tried to push those thoughts away, but they clung stubbornly. Across town, Marcus was walking through the narrow aisles of a hardware store, picking up materials for a job scheduled later that afternoon. Malik had gone to a friend's house, and for once the apartment was quiet. Still, his mind was restless. He found himself scanning shelves for things he didn't need, thinking about conversations that hadn't happened yet. He had spent most of his adult life avoiding exactly this: entanglements, emotions, the vulnerability that came with caring. He was used to being useful, Needed, but not wanted. He knew how to be helpful, how to solve problems, how to keep a home from falling apart. But this, Lena, was different. She didn't just need someone to fix her pipes. She wanted connection. And he wanted her in return. That truth terrified him. Back at home, Lena had begun clearing the garage, thinking of Lucas's project as a good distraction. The garage had become a graveyard of old toys, unused tools, and boxes she hadn't opened since her last move. She sorted in silence, wiping sweat from her forehead, trying to lose herself in the rhythm of work. The sound of her phone buzzing pulled her out of her thoughts. She wiped her hands and picked it up. It was Marcus. "I'm close by," he said. "You mind if I stop in for a bit?" She hesitated only a second. "No, come by. We're just in the garage." 15 minutes later, his truck pulled into the driveway. Lucas ran out before he had even stepped out of the vehicle. "I have a blueprint," Lucas announced. "Mom said I could use duct tape." "Then I better see this masterpiece," Marcus replied, crouching beside him. Lena stood in the garage doorway, watching the exchange. She felt that same tug in her chest, the way Marcus always managed to slot into their lives like he had always belonged. He stepped inside, looking around the garage. "You've been busy." "I figured we'd make space," she said, brushing hair from her face. "Lucas has big plans." "He gets that from you," Marcus said, smiling. She smiled back but looked away. He sensed it instantly. The shift, the tension. "Something wrong?" he asked. "No," she said too quickly, then sighed. "I don't know." He waited, quiet. "I guess I'm just trying to be realistic," she said, turning to face him. "You have your life. I have mine. And it's not a simple one. I have kids, a job, a mortgage. I'm not someone you can just date for fun." Marcus stepped closer, but his voice remained steady. "Who said this was for fun?" She hesitated, words tangled in her throat. "I just mean, I've been alone a long time. I've worked hard to hold everything together. If I let someone in and then they leave, it doesn't just affect me. It affects them too." "I'm not planning to leave," he said. "But what if you do?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "What if this becomes too much?" He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she saw the depth of his own fears mirrored in his eyes. "I think about that," he said, "more than I should, but what scares me more is not trying, not seeing what this could be." "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said. For a long moment, they stood in the quiet space of the garage, surrounded by dust and dreams and the beginnings of something neither of them could yet name. Then Lucas shouted from inside the house, and the moment broke like glass. That evening, after the kids were asleep, they sat on the back porch, watching the sky change colors. Lena wrapped herself in a light blanket. Marcus handed her a mug of tea. "I've been saving to open my own business," he said, unprompted. "I've been working weekends, late nights, trying to get there. But it means I'm not always available. And I don't want that to feel like a lack of commitment." She looked at him, surprised by his openness. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I get it, I do. I just need you to know that when I'm not here, it's not because I don't want to be. It's because I'm building something that I hope will give me the freedom to choose more freely, to choose you." The words landed softly but firmly. "I don't want to get in your way," she said. "You're not in my way," he replied. "You're part of the reason." They sat there until the moon climbed high and the neighborhood fell silent. When he finally stood to leave, she walked him to the door. He kissed her forehead this time, a tender press that said more than any speech could. But the next morning, Lena woke to a text from her boss, a new deadline, a pile of work, a reminder that life kept moving, regardless of romance. And across town, Marcus was staring at a half-built plumbing unit when he got a call from his supplier saying a payment had bounced. His heart sank. He would need to work double to make up for it. They were two people standing at the edge of something, but reality, as always, waited with outstretched hands, and neither of them knew yet whether they would hold on or pull away. The morning sun filtered in through the living room blinds, casting angled bars of golden light onto the hardwood floor. The house was quiet, not in the peaceful way Lena had come to enjoy, but in the heavy, reluctant silence of a home trying to hold itself together. It had been 4 days since Marcus last stopped by, 4 days since their quiet talk on the back porch, where he spoke of his dreams and she, for a moment, believed in a version of the future that included someone else walking beside her. But now, that version was slipping out of reach, blurred by the demands of real life. He hadn't disappeared completely. There were texts, short ones. Busy day. Late job. Hope your meeting went well. But they were colder than before, less frequent, more practical. The warmth they had carefully cultivated seemed to be retreating under layers of obligation and fatigue. Lena tried to tell herself it was just the pressure, that Marcus had warned her his schedule would be full, that this was temporary. But doubt had a cruel voice, and it spoke loudest in the quiet hours between dinner and bedtime. She leaned over the sink now, rinsing plates from breakfast. Lucas was in the den building another prototype, and Mila was curled up on the couch with a blanket and a picture book. The early promise of the day was already thinning as she checked the time in her calendar. Meetings, deadlines, calls, the usual. Nothing that left room for wondering why a man who once lingered after dinner now seemed to vanish between texts. At noon, she received an email from the school about Lucas's upcoming science fair. She was about to forward it to herself for later when Mila tugged at her sleeve, asking if they could go outside. The sun was warm. The breeze was soft. It was the kind of day built for trying again. They spent the afternoon in the backyard. Mila chalked flowers on the pavement while Lucas tested a parachute made of string and plastic grocery bags from the second-story window. Lena sat in a lawn chair with her laptop on her knees, trying to finish a report she had promised by Monday. But the words blurred on the screen. Her eyes drifted toward the driveway more than once. Later that evening, when the kids were settled and the house dipped again into that pensive quiet, Lena opened her messages. Marcus had left her last text unread. She typed something simple. Thinking about you. We're okay, but I miss seeing you. Then deleted it. The knock on the door came just before 8. She opened it expecting a neighbor or maybe a package, but it was him. Marcus stood there looking more tired than she had ever seen him. There was paint on his jeans and smudges on his forearms. His eyes were shadowed, not just with exhaustion, but with something else. Worry. Disappointment. He held nothing in his hands. "Hey," he said. She stepped back. "Come in." He entered, slowly, like someone unsure if they were welcome. The familiar scent of him, sawdust, sweat, detergent, wafted past her as he moved. He didn't sit. He stood just inside the living room, glancing around as if trying to reorient himself. "I've been working non-stop," he said. "I've had clients back out, a supplier who won't return my calls. I'm behind on 2 projects and still short on rent for the space I just signed the lease on." Lena crossed her arms, not coldly, but as a way to steady herself. You could have told me. I didn't want to dump that on you. You're not dumping. You're sharing, she said quietly. He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know how to do this. Be this. I'm used to being the one who helps, not the one who needs anything. Lena stepped closer. Maybe that's the problem. You keep thinking you need to earn a place here. I do, he said. You've built something solid. I don't want to knock it down just by being a mess. You wouldn't, she said. Marcus, this isn't about you being perfect, or stable, or always available. It's about whether you want to be here, really be here, even when it's messy. I do, he said immediately, almost too quickly, then softer, but I'm afraid I won't be enough. Lena reached for his hand. It was rough, calloused, warm. Being here is enough, she said, not disappearing, not retreating, just showing up. Marcus looked at her, eyes steady now. I'm sorry. She nodded, her thumb brushing the back of his hand. I know. They sat together on the couch, and for a while neither of them spoke. She rested her head on his shoulder. He leaned into her touch. The silence this time was different, not laced with doubt, but with comfort. I want to help, Lena said after a while, with the business, even just the paperwork or designs or whatever. He looked at her sideways. You do that? I want to. You're not a charity case, Marcus. You're someone I care about, someone my kids care about. His eyes softened. Lucas wants me to help build a robot with him. He left a drawing on my truck last time. She laughed. He did that without telling me. He said he wanted to make sure I came back. Marcus's voice broke slightly on the last word. Lena took his face in her hands. You're part of this now. If you want to be. I want to be. They kissed again, slower this time. Not with desperation, but with certainty. The following days moved like a series of small adjustments. Marcus came over in the evenings when he could. Lena carved out time on her lunch breaks to help him review contracts, organize receipts, update forms. The kids started setting a plate for him at dinner without being asked. One night, while Mila colored at the table and Lucas tinkered with gears, Marcus and Lena worked on his website mock-up at the kitchen counter. She wore her reading glasses and a hoodie. He sat beside her in a sweat-streaked t-shirt, looking more alive than she had seen him in weeks. You make this all look so easy, he said, watching her format the text. It's not easy. It's just mine, she said, like this business will be yours. He reached over, took her hand again. It already feels like it's ours. By the end of the week, the garage that had once been a storage room had been cleaned out and turned into a workspace. Marcus brought in a portable workbench, a shelf for tools, a pegboard. Lucas taped a sign on the door. Dad's Tools, a.k.a. Marcus. Lena had to step outside when she saw it. The emotion was too much. Not because of the name, but because her son had made space in his world for someone he believed would stay. That night, she and Marcus lay side by side in her bed. The house was quiet, the windows cracked open to let in the late spring air. She ran her fingers along the curve of his shoulder, and he kissed the inside of her wrist. I don't know where this is going, she said. Neither do I. But I want to keep building it. Me too. Outside, a car passed down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the wall. The moment was soft, unremarkable in its silence, but it was theirs. They didn't need to call it love yet, but they were speaking its language. The summer sun had risen early, casting a warm golden hue over the suburban neighborhood that had quietly become the backdrop of something extraordinary. The once lonely house on Willow Street, no longer carried the faint echo of emptiness in its walls. The spaces that had seemed just slightly too quiet, too neat, too still, now vibrated with life, with the smell of coffee and cinnamon toast, the thump of little feet on the stairs, and the low murmur of laughter shared between two voices that, only weeks ago, didn't know they belonged together. Lena stood barefoot on the kitchen tiles, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, her robe loosely tied. The early morning light bathed her in a soft glow. Through the window, she could see Marcus in the garage, his back turned as he adjusted something on his workbench. The space that had once been a graveyard for unused tools and forgotten boxes was now organized, alive, and purposeful. Lucas's robot prototype sat proudly in the corner, held together with a combination of duct tape, Legos, and a surprising amount of confidence. Everything felt different. Not in the kind of way that shouted from rooftops, but in the quiet, steady shift of something that had found its rightful place. The door creaked behind her, and Mila padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She climbed onto a stool and rested her chin on her folded arms. "Is Marcus here already?" she asked, her voice still heavy with sleep. "He came early to finish something," Lena said, brushing a loose curl from her daughter's face. "He promised to make you pancakes after." Mila smiled, her eyes fluttering closed again. It was a rhythm they had all fallen into so naturally that it sometimes startled Lena. How quickly her home had expanded to make room for him. How seamlessly he had stepped into a role he had never asked for, but never ran from either. He didn't try to replace anyone. He didn't call himself father or pretend to be more than he was. He just showed up, over and over again. With patience, with tools, with small thoughtful gestures that said everything his quiet mouth didn't. And yet, there were moments Lena caught herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the silence, the hesitation, the slow withdrawal. But it never came. Instead, what came were ordinary miracles. An email from a small local contracting firm who wanted to subcontract Marcus for their residential jobs. An invitation from Lucas's school for Marcus to speak at Career Day, which he accepted with a stunned kind of pride. A night when Lena came home late from work to find her children asleep, their homework done, the kitchen clean, and Marcus on the porch with a single candle and 2 mugs of tea waiting for her. Each moment stitched itself into the fabric of their days, not loudly, not dramatically, but with gentle finality. Still, it wasn't all perfect. Nothing real ever is. There were tense nights when Lena came home stressed, and Marcus had to remind himself not to take her short answers personally. There were weekends when his phone rang nonstop with client questions and problems, and she had to bite back the urge to ask him to put it away for just one day. They had their first argument 2 weeks after the garage was finished. It was over something simple. Lena had agreed to host her sister's kids for the weekend without discussing it with Marcus. He had been overwhelmed with work, tired, distracted, and the sudden chaos of 4 additional children sent him spiraling. He snapped. She snapped back. Voices rose, doors were closed a little too hard, but later that night, when the kids were asleep and the dishes were done, he found her in the bedroom, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed. He didn't make excuses. He simply sat beside her, took her hand, and said, "I panicked. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." She turned to him, the tightness in her jaw softening. "I should have asked. I'm used to making decisions alone. I forget I'm not alone anymore." They didn't solve everything that night, but they held each other. And in the stillness, they promised, without saying the words, that they would keep learning. Later that week, Lena's boss called her into the office and offered her a promotion, a significant one, a regional managerial role that came with better pay, better hours, and the chance to finally delegate some of the endless stress she'd carried alone for years. She accepted it, and the first person she called was Marcus. He answered on the first ring, breathless from rushing up a ladder, but when she told him, he let out a whoop that made her laugh so hard she nearly cried. "We're celebrating tonight," he said. And they did. They cooked together, Marcus grilling in the backyard while Lena made a salad in the kitchen, with Mila tossing in handfuls of shredded cheese like glitter. Lucas set the table and insisted they all wear the paper crowns left over from a birthday party months ago. It was ridiculous and beautiful and exactly right. After dinner, they sat outside, wrapped in light blankets, watching the kids chase fireflies. "You know," Marcus said softly, his arm around her shoulders, "I used to think I'd never get to have this. Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't think I'd ever deserve it." Lena leaned into him. "You deserve every bit of this." He didn't reply right away, just held her a little tighter. "And you?" he asked. "Do you believe you deserve it too?" She paused, then nodded. "For the first time in a long time, I think I do." They watched the stars appear, one by one, until the sky was scattered with tiny diamonds. The next morning, Marcus came by early again. He had a quiet excitement in his eyes, a folded sheet of paper in his back pocket, and an air of purpose in his step. Lena met him at the door in her robe, smiling. "What's the occasion?" "I got it," he said, pulling the paper out. "The loan. It came through. I can finally open the shop, a real place, my name on the door." She blinked, then grinned. "That's amazing." "I want you to see it," he said. "Come with me?" "Of course." She called her boss and took the day off. They dropped the kids at school and drove across town. The building wasn't much to look at yet. Brick walls, a dusty window, a faded awning, but it had potential. It had promise. Inside, Marcus pointed out where the reception would go, where the inventory shelves would stand, where he'd put a bench with his tools. His eyes sparkled, not with pride, but with relief, like he had finally come home to a version of himself he'd almost given up on. He turned to her and said, "I want you to be part of this, not just as someone who helped, as someone who belongs." "I already do," she said. Weeks passed and the business grew. Clients came, word spread, and Marcus hired his first assistant. The house on Willow Street stayed lively, full, a little louder now, a little messier, but richer in all the ways that mattered. One night, long after the kids had fallen asleep, Marcus knelt beside Lena on the back porch. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a speech. Just a quiet question. "Whatever comes next, will you face it with me?" She answered, not with words, but with a kiss that tasted like certainty. And in that moment, the future no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something they could build together, nail by nail, brick by brick, day by day. Not perfect, not always easy, but entirely, wholly, beautifully theirs. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see what happens next, and don't forget to share this video with someone who'd love it too.